London, 1845. The clock in the Everleigh ballroom chimed 11, and Rose Elliott felt every note resonate with her growing desperation. 5 seasons. 5 seasons of standing against walls, adorned with more interesting patterns than herself, of conversations that faltered before truly beginning, of dance cards bearing only her own practiced penmanship. Tonight was no different. Rose adjusted the sage green gown that her mother had declared perfectly adequate, though both knew it was last season's remake. The stiff fabric scratched against her collarbone as she pressed deeper into the shadowed alcove. "You might consider smiling, Miss Elliott," came Lady Harrington's voice as she swept past in a cloud of French perfume. "Men do not pursue women who look as though they are attending a funeral." Rose forced her lips into what she hoped resembled pleasure rather than pain. In her 23 years, she had grown accustomed to such helpful suggestions. Stand straighter, speak softer, be more accomplished, yet never appear too intelligent. The contradictions exhausted her. From her position, Rose could observe the entire gathering without drawing attention. Lady Bennington's daughters, each more vivacious than the last, surrounded by earnest suitors. The widow Mrs. Stevens, whose scandalous second marriage had somehow elevated rather than diminished her standing. Even plain Miss Fenwick had secured a dance with young Lord Wexham. "Love and marriage are games of chance and strategy," her mother often said, "and you, my dear, have shown aptitude for neither." Rose had come to believe her mother's assessment. Love belonged to the beautiful, the wealthy, the charming, not to the awkward daughter of a gentleman whose modest fortune dwindled with each passing season. Not to a woman whose conversational abilities froze in company and whose musical talents were competent rather than captivating. Her future stretched before her with brutal clarity. Spinsterhood, dependency, perhaps a position as companion to some elderly relation if fortune favored her. The alternative, a marriage of convenience to whatever aging widower might accept her dwindling dowry, seemed equally bleak. "Miss Elliott, you appear deep in thought." Rose started, nearly upsetting the glass of lukewarm punch she'd been nursing. Before her stood Mr. Thomas Carrington, younger son of the Earl of Westmoreland. Handsome in the conventional sense, with dark hair and intelligent eyes, he had arrived from a diplomatic posting in Vienna earlier that month, or so gossip reported. "Mr. Carrington," she cursed, an awkward movement that nearly cost her balance. "I apologize, I was contemplating the architecture." A fascinating subject. His smile revealed a slight dimple in his left cheek. "Though I would have thought the company might offer more compelling study." Was he mocking her? Rose searched his expression for signs of the familiar derision she'd grown accustomed to detecting, but found none. "The company is indeed worth studying, sir. I simply prefer to observe rather than participate at times." A thoughtful approach. He glanced toward the dancers, then back to her, "Though I wonder if you might make an exception. The next set is forming, and I find myself without a partner." Rose's heart stuttered. "Surely there are many ladies who would welcome your invitation." "Undoubtedly," that dimple appeared again. "Yet I am asking you, Miss Elliott." The dance was a quadrille, mercifully less demanding than a waltz. Rose moved through the steps with careful precision, aware of the surprised glances cast their way. Mr. Carrington led with confidence, his hand firm but gentle when it met hers. "You dance well, Miss Elliott." "You needn't offer compliments out of politeness, sir." "I never offer compliments out of politeness. It's a terrible waste of words." His tone was light, but his gaze was steady. "You move with grace, if caution. One might imagine you've spent more time watching dances than participating in them." The observation, though accurate, strung. "One might imagine correctly." "A shame, though it explains your talent for observation. Tell me, what have you observed about me?" Rose hesitated. The dance separated them momentarily, allowing her to gather her thoughts. When they came together again, she said, "You appear comfortable in society yet stand slightly apart from it. You observe before you speak. And your cravat is tied in a style popular in Vienna, but your accent suggests you spent your formative years in the north of England." Surprise and something like pleasure flickered across his features. "Remarkable. Most people notice only that I am the Earl's second son, and therefore of limited consequence despite modest diplomatic achievements. Being overlooked often grants one perspective, Mr. Carrington. Indeed it does, Miss Elliott. The music drew to a close, and Rose found herself oddly disappointed. Mr. Carrington escorted her back to her mother, who had materialized with unprecedented speed once she noticed her daughter dancing with a gentleman of consequence. "Mr. Carrington, what a pleasure," Mrs. Elliott gushed. "How fortunate that you discovered my Rose." She's so often engaged in deep conversation that gentlemen hesitate to interrupt her. Rose felt heat rise to her cheeks at the blatant falsehood. Mr. Carrington's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "Fortune indeed, Mrs. Elliott. Your daughter has a refreshing perspective. I hope to continue our acquaintance." With a bow he departed, leaving Rose to her mother's hushed excitement and her own confusion. No gentleman had ever sought her company without ulterior motive, usually information about one of her more desirable friends. Yet Mr. Carrington had seemed genuinely interested in her conversation. "Well." Her mother clutched Rose's arm. "It appears someone has finally noticed you, though we must get you a new gown immediately. That shade does nothing for your complexion." Rose barely heard her mother's plans for improving her suddenly promising prospects. Her thoughts remained fixed on Mr. Carrington's parting words, "I hope to continue our acquaintance." Words she had never expected to hear, directed at her. For the first time in 5 seasons, Rose left a ballroom with something dangerously like hope fluttering in her chest. The flutter died the following afternoon when Mrs. Elliott burst into the morning room, waving the latest issue of the London Gazette with unusual agitation. "It cannot be." Her mother collapsed dramatically onto the settee. "After all our years of careful navigation." Rose set aside her book. "What troubles you, mother?" "The Duke of Thornfield has returned to London." The name meant little to Rose. "I fail to see how this affects us." "Mrs. Elliott thrust the paper toward her. "The Duke of Thornfield, your father's cousin." Rose skimmed the article announcing the return of Thomas Carrington, Duke of Thornfield, from his diplomatic mission abroad. Understanding dawned slowly, then crashed upon her with stunning force. The Mr. Carrington she had met last night was not merely the son of an earl. He was a duke. The duke her father had quarrelled with years ago over a matter involving disputed land boundaries and ancient family grievances. "He approached you deliberately," her mother continued, pacing now, "to make sport of us, to humiliate the family that has suffered most from his father's ruthlessness." "Perhaps he didn't know who I was," Rose suggested, though she doubted her own words. "A duke would certainly be informed of all his connections, even estranged ones." "Nonsense. He knew precisely who you were. Why else single out the plainest girl in the room?" It was calculated malice. Each word struck Rose with painful accuracy. Of course, a man like the Duke of Thornfield would have no genuine interest in someone like her. Their encounter suddenly made perfect sense. His curiosity about her observations, his pointed comments about being overlooked. "What shall we do?" Mrs. Elliott moaned. "We cannot avoid society entirely, yet to face him after such deliberate mockery." "We shall do nothing," Rose said quietly, steeling herself against the familiar ache of disappointment. "One dance means nothing. I doubt he will seek my company again." But she was wrong. 3 days later, at Lady Ashington's musical evening, the Duke of Thornfield made his way directly to Rose's side, ignoring the fluttering attention of far more eligible young ladies. "Miss Elliott," he said with a bow, "I've been looking for you." Rose maintained a cool expression. "Your Grace, I believe you neglected to mention your title during our previous encounter." "Ah," he winced slightly. "A deliberate omission, I confess." "How convenient." "Not convenience, preference. I find people speak more openly with Mr. Carrington than they do with the Duke of Thornfield." "And what information were you hoping to extract from me?" Confusion crossed his features. "Information, none whatsoever. Merely conversation untainted by title or expectation." "A novel amusement for your Grace, no doubt, if you'll excuse me." Rose made to rise, but his next words stopped her. "I was unaware of the connection between our families, until yesterday morning. Rose studied him skeptically. A duke, unaware of his relations, that strains credulity, your grace. Familial disputes were my father's domain. I spent the past 7 years in diplomatic service, largely removed from such matters. His voice lowered. When we met, I knew only that I found your candor refreshing in a sea of practiced pleasantries. Something in his direct gaze made Rose hesitate. Even if I believed you, what could possibly be your purpose in seeking my company now that you know the truth? Perhaps to determine if the feud between our families has merit, or if, like many such quarrels, it has outlived its purpose. He gestured to the vacant seat beside her. May I? Against her better judgment, Rose nodded. The Duke settled beside her, maintaining a proper distance. I understand the dispute involved the eastern boundary of Thornfield Park and 3 tenant cottages that your father claimed despite their historical connection to my father's property, Rose added. The loss of their rents has contributed significantly to our reduced circumstances. I see, he frowned thoughtfully, and no resolution was ever attempted. My father approached yours twice. He was rebuffed with increasing hostility. My father could be, he paused, choosing his words carefully, challenging. His death last year is what prompted my return from Vienna. The conversation was interrupted by the commencement of the musical performances. Rose found herself acutely aware of the Duke's presence beside her throughout the evening. He made no further mention of family disputes, instead offering quiet, often amusing observations about the performers and guests. When he escorted her to her mother at evening's end, he asked permission to call upon them the following day. Mrs. Elliott, overcome by the attention of a duke, enemy or not, could hardly refuse. Rose spent a restless night questioning his motives. Was this elaborate revenge for some perceived slight, a strange amusement at her family's expense, or could there possibly be genuine interest behind those thoughtful eyes? Don't be a fool, she whispered to herself as dawn broke. Men like him do not seek women like you without purpose. The Duke arrived promptly at the appointed hour, bringing with him a portfolio of documents that he requested to discuss with both Rose and her father. In Mr. Elliott's study, he spread the papers across the desk. I've had my solicitors research the boundary dispute. It appears the cottages in question were indeed part of the Elliott property until my grandfather's time, when a surveyor's error incorporated them into Thornfield lands. Mr. Elliott stared in astonishment. You acknowledge this freely. I see no reason to perpetuate an injustice, regardless of who committed it. The Duke indicated several legal documents. I've taken the liberty of drawing up papers to return the properties and compensate your family for the lost revenue. This is unexpected, Mr. Elliott said cautiously. Consider it the first step toward ending a pointless feud. The Duke's gaze shifted briefly to Rose. I have no interest in maintaining enmity with my relations. After the men concluded their business, the Duke requested a moment alone with Rose. Her parents withdrew reluctantly, her mother's meaningful glance communicating volumes of caution and possibility. Your actions today were generous, Rose said when they were alone, though properly chaperoned by the maid dusting the same shelf for the 3rd time. They were just not generous, he stepped closer. Miss Elliott, I must confess something. Rose tensed, preparing herself for whatever revelation might destroy this fragile moment. I recognized your name immediately at the Everleigh ball. So you did know who I was. The confirmation strung despite her preparation. Yes, but not as you imagine, he smiled ruefully. 5 years ago, while serving in Vienna, I received a letter from my father raging about that insufferable Elliott and his blue-stocking daughter who dared question the boundary lines. He mentioned you had discovered some ancient parish record that supported your father's claim. Rose remembered the incident. County archives, actually, I spent weeks researching. Precisely. My father was particularly incensed that a young woman had outwitted his solicitors. The Duke's expression softened. I found myself intrigued by this unnamed woman who had so thoroughly discomposed my father. When I heard your name at the ball, I was curious to meet this formidable researcher. And were you disappointed? The question escaped before Rose could prevent it. Quite the contrary. I discovered a woman who observes keenly, speaks thoughtfully, and dances with unexpected grace. His gaze held her steadily. I would very much like to know her better, feud notwithstanding. Rose felt her careful defenses weakening. Society would find such an association peculiar at best, scandalous at worst. I have never been overly concerned with society's opinions. He reached for a hand, then caught himself and stepped back. With your permission, I should like to call again tomorrow. Perhaps we might walk in the park. Against every rational thought, Rose found herself nodding. I would like that. In the weeks that followed, the Duke of Thornfield became a regular visitor to the Elliott household. Society buzzed with speculation about his interest in the unremarkable Miss Elliott. Theories ranged from the mundane, a secret engagement arranged by their parents, to the scandalous, Rose possessed some damning information about the Duke. The truth that they simply enjoyed each other's company seemed too improbable to consider. Their walks in the park became a regular occurrence, as did his attendance at every social event where Rose might be present. They discussed books, debated philosophy, and shared observations about the quirks of London society. He sought her opinions and valued her intelligence in a way no one ever had before. People are beginning to talk, Rose said one afternoon as they strolled through Hyde Park, her mother following at a discreet distance. Let them, he replied. Their conversations are generally lacking in both fact and imagination. They question your interest in me, as do I at times. The Duke stopped walking, turning to face her. Do you truly not understand? I understand that you are kind and perhaps grateful for the resolution of the family dispute, but beyond that, she shook her head. You could have any woman in London. A dubious privilege, as most women in London want the Duke, not the man. His expression grew serious. You saw me before you knew my title. You challenged me when you learned it. You've never once mentioned my homes, or fortune, or connections. Would you prefer I did? Rose asked, puzzled. God, no, he laughed. I prefer exactly what you offer, conversation without calculation, opinions without artifice, company without condition. Rose felt a dangerous warmth spreading through her chest. You make me sound far more interesting than I am. You underestimate yourself consistently, Miss Elliott. It's perhaps your only significant flaw. His voice softened. When I returned to England, I expected many things: estate responsibilities, social obligations, pressure to make a suitable match. I never expected to find someone I would genuinely look forward to seeing each day. Before Rose could respond, they were interrupted by Lady Harrington, whose ability to materialize whenever conversation grew interesting bordered on supernatural. Your Grace, Miss Elliott, she trilled, how delightful to find you enjoying the fine weather. The moment broken, Rose watched the Duke slip back into his public persona, polite but reserved. The warmth of his words lingered, however, stirring possibilities she had never permitted herself to consider. That evening, Rose found herself seated beside Lady Pembroke at the Countess of Ashton's dinner party, an unexpected elevation in social standing that could be attributed solely to her association with the Duke. He watches you constantly, Lady Pembroke observed, following the Duke's gaze across the table. Most indiscreet, but rather romantic. One wonders what captured his interest so thoroughly. The words, though delivered with a smile, carried a clear undertone. What could he possibly see in you? Perhaps his Grace enjoys conversations that extend beyond the weather, and whose gown was most scandalous at Almack's, Rose replied, surprising herself with her boldness. Lady Pembroke's eyebrows rose appreciatively. Perhaps indeed, though one hopes the attachment is not too deeply formed. And why is that? Rose asked, though she suspected she knew. My dear, you must know the Duke of Thornfield will be expected to make a advantageous match. The title demands it. Lady Pembroke patted Rose's hand with full sympathy. It would be tragic if misunderstandings were to develop. The carefully delivered warning settled like ice in Rose's stomach. Of course. How foolish she had been to forget, even momentarily, the realities of their situations. A duke, particularly one with estates to restore and responsibilities to uphold, needed a wife with wealth, connections, and social standing. Not a plain woman of modest means whose family had only recently emerged from relative disgrace. After dinner, she deliberately avoided the Duke, engaging elderly Lord Harcourt in lengthy discussion of his prized orchids. When the Duke finally managed to approach her, she maintained a careful distance. "You've been avoiding me," he said quietly. "Not at all, I've merely been engaged in conversation. About flowers you have no interest in, with a gentleman who repeated the same anecdote 3 times. His brow furrowed. "What's happened?" "You seem distressed." "I'm perfectly well, simply coming to my senses." "What does that mean?" Rose glanced around, ensuring they wouldn't be overheard. "It means I've remembered who we are, Your Grace, who you are, and the impossibility of whatever this might be developing into." His expression darkened. "I see Lady Pembroke found you. What precisely did she say?" "Nothing that wasn't true. You have responsibilities, expectations. A duke cannot simply follow his inclinations without consequence." "I am well aware of my position, Miss Elliott." His voice carried an edge she hadn't heard before. "I'm also aware that the privilege of rank includes determining my own path in certain matters. Some would call that selfishness rather than privilege. And some would recognize that a man in my position rarely has the luxury of authentic connection." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "When I find it, I value it accordingly." Rose felt her resolve weakening. "Your Grace." "Thomas," he corrected. "When we speak truths, I would have you use my name." "Thomas," she conceded, the intimacy of his name on her lips sending an unexpected shiver through her. "I cannot bear to be a source of gossip or scorn or, worst of all, pity." The Wallflower who deluded herself into thinking a duke might truly. "Might truly what?" he prompted when she stopped abruptly. "Might truly see beyond her station and circumstance," she finished, avoiding the more dangerous word that had nearly escaped. "I see you precisely as you are, Rose." He spoke her name with such tenderness that she had to look away. "And I would have all of society see you as I do, intelligent, perceptive, quietly extraordinary." "Impossible." "Perhaps," a smile touched his lips, "but diplomacy has taught me that impossible simply means no one has yet found the correct approach." Before she could respond, they were interrupted again, this time by the Countess announcing the commencement of cards. The Duke was drawn away by his host, leaving Rose to wonder at his words and the determination behind them. The following morning, Rose's contemplation was shattered by her mother bursting into the breakfast room, face ashen. "We are ruined, Mrs." Elliott declared, collapsing into a chair. "Utterly, irredeemably ruined." Rose set down her teacup. "What has happened?" "Lady Worthington's luncheon. We must decline immediately." "Mother, please explain yourself clearly." "Mrs." Elliott thrust a newspaper toward her daughter. This abomination appeared in this morning's society pages." Rose scanned the indicated column and felt the blood drain from her face. The Ton buzzes with speculation regarding a certain duke's marked attention to Miss E, a lady previously overlooked in 5 seasons of society. While the lady's modest charms have failed to secure even minor interest before now, one must wonder what particular talents she possesses to so thoroughly captivate one of England's most eligible peers. Sources close to the family suggest the connection may involve compromising circumstances cleverly concealed. The insinuation was clear enough to destroy any young woman's reputation. Rose set the paper down with trembling hands. "Who would write such things?" she whispered. "It hardly matters who wrote it when all of London will read it," Mrs. Elliott moaned. "Your father is beside himself. We cannot possibly show our faces in society after this." Rose felt numb. The columnist had effectively suggested she had entrapped the Duke through improper behavior, a scandal from which there could be no recovery. Even if the rumors were dismissed, the shadow of them would follow her permanently. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. The maid entered, looking flustered. "Begging your pardon, ma'am, but the Duke of Thornfield is here and insists on speaking with Miss Elliott immediately. He says it cannot wait." Mrs. Elliott looked torn between social propriety and the possibility of salvaging the situation. Show him to the drawing room. We shall be there directly. When they entered, the Duke was pacing, his expression thunderous. He turned immediately at their arrival. Miss Elliott, Mrs. Elliott, he bowed stiffly. I presume you've seen this morning's disgraceful column. We have, Rose replied quietly, though I'm surprised your Grace would risk association with us after such publication. Risk, he looked genuinely perplexed. The risk is entirely to you and your family. This slander is unconscionable. Yet entirely predictable, Rose said. Society has always found ways to punish those who step beyond their prescribed boundaries. The Duke's jaw tightened. I've already dispatched my solicitors to the newspaper's offices. The editor will print a retraction tomorrow or face ruinous legal consequences. A retraction will not undo the damage, Mrs. Elliott said miserably. Gossip once started cannot be recalled. No, but it can be overshadowed. He turned to Rose, his expression softening, which brings me to my purpose here today. Rose felt a flutter of alarm. Your Grace. I had intended a different setting, a more conventional approach. He glanced at Mrs. Elliott, then back to Rose, but circumstances demand expediency over tradition. With swift, decisive movement, he closed the distance between them and took Rose's hand in his. Miss Elliott, Rose, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Mrs. Elliott gasped audibly. Rose stared at him in shock. You cannot be serious. I have never been more serious about anything in my life. His grip tightened slightly. Say yes, and by this afternoon all of London will know our engagement predates that vile column. The scandal becomes meaningless. I cannot accept a proposal born of obligation or pity, Rose said, withdrawing her hand despite every instinct urging her to hold fast. Obligation, pity, a flash of genuine anger crossed his features. Is that truly what you believe me capable of, proposing marriage, binding myself for life, out of some misplaced sense of duty? What else am I to think? Yesterday we spoke of impossibilities. Today, after this, she gestured toward the newspaper, you suddenly propose marriage. Not suddenly, his voice softened. I've carried my grandmother's ring in my pocket for a week, waiting for the proper moment. He withdrew a small velvet box from his coat. This was not how I intended to ask, but my intentions have been fixed since our third conversation. Rose stared at the box, unable to reconcile his words with her understanding of the world. But you are a duke. I am. The woman I love, he finished simply. The woman whose mind engages mine, whose perspective challenges me, whose presence I cannot imagine living without. He opened the box to reveal an emerald ring surrounded by diamonds. Marry me not because of this scandal, but despite it. Marry me because there is something rare between us that deserves to be cherished. Rose felt tears threatening. People will say the most terrible things. That I trapped you, that you were compromised, that I... Let them talk, we'll know the truth. He took her hand again, more gently this time. I am asking you to trust me, Rose, to believe that I know my own heart and mind. Mrs. Elliott, who had been watching the exchange with increasing hope, finally spoke. Perhaps I should give you a moment of privacy. She retreated to the far side of the room, maintaining technical propriety while granting them a semblance of space. Rose studied the Duke's, Thomas's, face, searching for any hint of reservation or regret. She found none. You truly want this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Me. Despite everything. Because of everything, he smiled, that dimple appearing in his cheek. Your quiet strength, your brilliant mind, your kind heart that you try so hard to protect. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. I love you, Rose Elliott. Would you marry me? The last of Rose's doubts crumbled beneath the sincerity in his eyes. Yes, she breathed. Yes, I will marry you. His smile was transformative, years falling away to reveal boyish delight as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Thank God, I feared your good sense might prevail over my persuasion. My good sense abandoned me weeks ago, I'm afraid. Rose gazed at the ring, its weight unfamiliar but somehow right. "I've been falling in love with you since you asked about my observations at the Everleigh ball." He laughed softly, "And I since you told me quite firmly that I needn't offer compliments out of politeness." "Mrs." Elliott bustled back immediately, as if sensing the conclusion of the moment. "This is most unexpected, but of course we are delighted, Your Grace, absolutely delighted. We must inform Mr. Elliott at once, and then—" "And then," Thomas interrupted gently, "we shall visit the Archbishop of Canterbury for a special license. With your permission, of course." Mrs. Elliott blinked rapidly, so quickly. "I see no reason to wait." "Unless Miss Elliott prefers a more elaborate ceremony," he looked at Rose questioningly. "No," she said with surprising certainty. "I've never wanted a grand wedding. Something simple with family would be perfect." "Then it's settled." Thomas's expression grew serious. "And after we are married, I intend to discover who pennied that libelous column and ensure they never publish another word in London." The engagement of the Duke of Thornfield to Miss Rose Elliott was announced that afternoon in a special printing of the Gazette, noting that the couple had been privately engaged for several weeks with the blessing of both families. The speed of the announcement, coupled with the Duke's well-known solicitors visiting various newspaper offices, effectively silenced the more vicious rumours. Society, predictably, divided in its reaction. Some declared it a love match of the most romantic nature, the overlooked Wallflower and the powerful Duke. Others maintained more cynical interpretations, though none dared voice them in the Duke's hearing. Lady Harrington, ever practical, revised her opinion immediately upon receiving an invitation to the small wedding ceremony. "I always saw something special in Miss Elliott," she confided to Lady Pembroke. "Such quiet dignity, the perfect temperament for a duchess, don't you think?" The wedding took place 2 weeks later in the Duke of Thornfield's private chapel, attended by family and close friends. Rose wore a gown of ivory silk with emerald accents that matched her engagement ring, her hair adorned with fresh flowers rather than the traditional diamonds expected of a duchess. As she walked toward Thomas, Rose felt the weight of society's expectations fall away. The man waiting for her saw beyond her modest beginnings, beyond the carefully constructed walls she had built around her heart. He saw her, truly saw her, when everyone else had looked past. Their vows were traditional but spoken with unusual fervor, each word carrying the weight of genuine commitment. When Thomas slipped the wedding band onto her finger, he whispered words meant only for her, no longer overlooked, never again forgotten. The Duchess of Thornfield's first appearance in society came 3 weeks later at a ball hosted in the couple's honor. Rose entered on her husband's arm, dressed in Thornfield blue, her confidence visibly transformed. No longer pressed against the wall, she moved through the room with quiet assurance, her hand firmly clasped in her husband's. "You look magnificent," Thomas murmured, as they prepared for their first dance as husband and wife. "Everyone is wondering how they failed to notice you all these years." "Perhaps I needed to be truly seen by one person before I could be visible to everyone else," Rose replied, smiling up at him. "Or perhaps they simply needed someone to show them how to look properly." "Either way," he said, leading her into the waltz, "I consider myself fortunate that they overlooked the greatest treasure in London long enough for me to claim it as my own." As they moved across the floor, Rose caught glimpses of the society that had once dismissed her, now watching with admiration and envy. Lady Harrington nodding approvingly, Lady Pembroke's barely concealed astonishment, the Bennington girls whispering behind their fans. But it was Thomas's gaze that mattered, Thomas who saw her intelligence and valued her perspective, Thomas who had refused to let society dictate his choice, Thomas who loved her not despite her quiet nature, but because of the depth it concealed. "What are you thinking?" he asked as the music drew to a close. Rose smiled, no longer the overlooked Wallflower, but a woman who knew her worth. "I'm thinking that some things are worth waiting 5 seasons for." "Only 5, Thomas laughed, drawing her closer than strict propriety allowed. "My dear Rose, I would have waited a lifetime to find you." And in that moment, surrounded by the very society that had once rendered her invisible, Rose Elliott Carrington, Duchess of Thornfield, was finally completely seen.